I left in year 2000. I co-founded a company that provided title insurance for fine art and other important collectibles, which was really all about making art as an asset. Sold that in 2010, lived out my employment agreement. And then I thought, well, maybe I've got one more career left in me. So I went to the family offices, the wealth managers, trust and estate attorneys. And I'm like, hey, you guys know me as the art girl, but I have a big background in liability. What's the number one issue your clients are facing today? And everybody said trustee liability. And I was like, 15 years ago, that would have been really easy. I wonder what's really going on. So I did a deep dive into the trust and estate market and realized things are changing fast and furiously. Back to your comment, there aren't enough trustees in the world to handle all the trusts that are being created. You've got this transition between the traditional trust to the directed trust. What does that mean from a roles, responsibility, liability perspective? And that actually opened my world right back up into, not only is it the individual trustees, and part of what I talk with families about is don't put your family members in this role of responsibility unless you're putting them in an aspect where they can provide direction around legacy, but not making some of these decisions that put them counter to the beneficiaries that they might be talking about. I also work with trust companies around the country, not the JP Morgans of the world, because I did that in my big world, but all these administrative trust companies that are popping up. And that's where I've started to see these private trust companies, because I've been asked on, how to manage the insurance. And then family offices, back to what you were saying, is there is no such thing as a definition. And it's really trying to help people understand the difference between, and again, it's a risk management and a risk transfer perspective, and how these are getting organized on how to really make sure they're accomplishing what they think that they want to accomplish. And I have a lot of conversations with people. Like I had probably one of the largest family offices I've ever really spoken with. And if they had, and this is just between you and me, I would not give the example in any kind of presentation, but for you, if they had chief legal counsel and they were 30, they were old, right? And so some of the responses I was getting to, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I was getting a very young person's perspective. And I kept saying, I get what you're saying in terms of the enormity of wealth that these people have, but I don't feel like you're thinking about how to make sure everybody understands the intentionality about this, right? I get, they may be worth so many billions of dollars, and a $10 million loss is no big deal. It's no big deal as long as they're intentionally taking on the risk, right? And so I started getting this conversation around okay, explain to me how things are organized and, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden we got to a point where there was silence. And they called me back about 30 days later and said we had to stop there because we actually hadn't even incorporated some of the entities that we're talking about, right? So there's a lot of things to talk about here. So it's now that you kind of know this big breath, happy to talk about just private trust companies. Happy to talk about, really, it's a big message to have, the wealth creators understand who to appoint from a risk management perspective. I'm not the one that's designing things. I'm the tail on the dog that kind of talks about, as you design something, what are your risks, and just think about these other things before we figure out what risk management tools we can implement before insurance, and then how do we insure them afterwards. Does that make sense? I just said a lot of stuff there.
Let me tell you what you just covered, what I think you should cover.